Hey there, fellow parents. Welcome to the Real Life of Parenting podcast, where we're all about embracing the chaos, sharing the laughter, and navigating the roller coaster ride of parenthood. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Jenna.
And together, we're your co-pilots on this adventure.
Each episode will dive into the highs and the lows and the hilariously unpredictable moments that make parenting the wild journey it is.
So get ready for real stories, genuine conversations, and a few parenting hacks along the way. Whether you're dealing with diaper disasters or celebrating those small victories, we've got your back.
So buckle up, hit play, and let's embark on this parenting odyssey together. This is The Real Life of Parenting, where every episode is a reminder that you are not alone in the beautiful chaos of raising little ones.
Hi, and welcome back to the Real Life of Parenting podcast. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Jenna.
And today we have a special guest, Jason Tuttle. He has the Letters to Zachary. It's a blog that he writes on his Facebook page. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jason?
Yes, I'm a married father of two kids with multiple disabilities. I've been married for this year will be 21 years, if my math is correct. Both of my kids were born with a multitude of medical disabilities. The easiest way to describe it is both my son and daughter were born with severe neurological delays, which means that even though they're in their teenage years, they both function about 4 to 6 years old. They're both epileptic. They both have had seizures. In fact, of the 6 different kinds of seizures that are present, and today I've seen 4 of them in my house. They're both nonverbal. They can walk with assistance, but they are basically wheelchair bound for long distances. And then my son was born with a rare condition called Eagle-Barrett syndrome. And without getting in all of the medical terminology, basically the simplest way to describe it is it forms from a kidney issue. They don't know the actual origination of it, but it comes from a kidney issue. So my son was born with one kidney. That one kidney sustained damage in utero before he was born. So Eagle-Barrett syndrome means he has no core abdominal muscles, like he's got no midsection muscle at all. He's got an abnormally large bladder that has to be given a catheter every 4 hours because he doesn't get the sensation to have to actually go to the bathroom. We have to do some other medical procedures on the other side as well due to his condition. He breathes normally, but because like when you and I get a pneumonia style illness where we have that force to get things out, he cannot get those things out. So I had a whole wall full of respiratory machinery. I helped him to break it up, loosen it up, get it up into his system, get it out of his throat, and suction it out. When it came to that, so that was basically my kids in a nutshell with a few other things sprinkled in there.
Well, I'd say that's a little bit outside the norm as a regular parent, eh?
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't imagine the kind of stuff you were dealing with on a daily basis. Even now.
I will say initially we had no reason to believe that he or both of my kids were going to have any medical issues that we knew of. In fact, we didn't know anything from my son until that, the week 20 appointments, that appointment everybody looks forward to, because that's kind of when you can tell the sex of the child. And so basically that day when we got in there, my wife didn't want to know. I did want to know because I'm a planner. We went back and forth, and the ultrasound tech goes, well, I'm at the point in which I can find out the sex of the child. Do you want to know? And so we kind of playfully went back and forth. And her next comment, which changed our lives forever, was, I need to know. I see an issue. And so we said, we want to know. She said, you're having a boy. And we go, well, first of all, why did you need to know the sex of the child? And two, what's the issue? And she goes, well, if it's what I think it is, it's rare in boys, but it's even rarer in girls. And as for the actual issue, that's something that your doctor needs to talk to you about. And from that point, we saw a doctor and went to a perinatologist, which is basically a high risk OBGYN, is what that is. And it went from there. We started seeing specialists and many different doctors with very long titles.
Yeah. I can't imagine, right?
It's
Like
crazy. Yeah.
trying to remember all that information, especially I guess way back then, you would be just kind of at that point where you're kind of not paying attention to every single thing the doctor's telling you and you're just trying to process it, right? So,
Yeah, yes and no. It was certainly a lot of information. We Over the years, we've learned that there are two types of doctors these days.
mhm.
Either they don't want to tell you anything until they know 100% without a doubt, or they want to tell you literally everything under the sun as to cover themselves so that they don't get sued should something come up that they didn't tell you
Yeah.
about. And so all of the doctors that we had were the ones that wanted to tell us every major problem that could possibly go wrong. And understand that my son was our first child. We were a young married couple, and the one appointment that I could not make it to for the perinatologist, he just lays this like load of information on my wife of, well, he may be epileptic, he may have hydrocephalus, which is water on the brain, he may need a shunt in his brain to drain the water, he may need just these big long-term thing. And so it just kind of went from there. And then we actually didn't know about the Eagle Barrett syndrome until the day he was born. And then the doctor came in and said, by the way, your son was born with Eagle Barrett syndrome. And I looked at him and went, he was born with what? And he kind of explained it, and it went from there.
Wow.
Mhm.
That must have been so overwhelming in that moment too. Like just to hear that and then, with the other issues from like the 20 weeks and
Mm.
I honestly couldn't even imagine being in that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't. Honestly, as a man, especially in the special needs world, I've learned to compartmentalize very well, just so I could kind of get through the moment. And my son was born. We saw him for about 2 minutes that day. He went up to the ICU at the hospital we were at. They told us later that day he was going to be transported to the local children's hospital, which was on the north side of Atlanta, and that he would be in that NICU there. And so he got transported the next day, and he was in that NICU for probably the next 11 days after that. And I was visiting him every day at that point, and it was about the third day, if I remember correctly, where like the head nurse comes up to me, and I'm sitting there looking in the crib, just looking at my son, and she's just rattling off all these different things going at me. And at some point during that time, it hits me like a Mack truck, and I lose it. I mean, I fall apart at this point because, at this point I think I was 28, 27 at this point when my son was born. I'm a new father, I'm a new parent, and I'm getting hit with, realizing that my son's going to have 6 specialists that I've got to go see every 6 months, and these conditions nobody's ever heard of. And it was a
Mhm.
lot at that point.
Absolutely.
I think was a honest assessment from you being able to compartmentalize everything. Like I think that's a
Mm.
common thing with a lot of men in the relationships usually, right? Like usually the women are quite emotional and us as men trying to be rocks and trying to
Mhm.
be there for them. And you do get that mindset of like I need to be the one that's kind of dealing with everything and handling it all essentially
Mhm.
without any help. Can you kind of talk about a little bit of that and maybe it,
Yeah. Well, I never, before, having children that had medical needs, I never considered myself kind of the type A personality, but I learned very quickly I needed to be.
Mhm.
Um, you know, those of us that have kids with medical needs there's a very steep, very fast learning curve. And typically what happens is in the beginning you get in there and you believe everything the doctor says, you take them exactly for their word and you don't question anything. Well, you start getting to a point where you start really questioning, well, is this the best for my child? And are you doing what I think is best for my child? So, there were a lot of the compartmentalization that I had was actually dealing with the specialist, because I ran across several that thought they were God's gift to medicine, and that just, at least for me, that was kind of an anger
Hmm.
point for me, because I'm just like, in fact, I told one of them, I said, medical science doesn't know everything. If you don't know it, tell me you don't know it. I won't be offended if you say, well, we just don't know at this point, because either they've never seen it before or whatever the reason is. So, uh, you know, m- between my wife and I, we've kind of had the non-traditional role, in the sense of I was always the one that's going to stay at home and take care of them. And so I always kind of knew from the beginning I was starting off as kind of the foundation, if you will, because
Hmm.
I was the one that was going to be at home. I was the one that's going to be taking care of them. I was the one that's going to do all the doctor's visits and specialist visits, and what turned out to be a lot of hospital stays. And so I just kind of got the focus into it of, well, now no matter how I necessarily feel, this is just what I've got to do.
That's interesting. So kind of want to talk a little bit, I guess, about the reverse gender roles, as you
Hmm.
called it there. Um, so how is that, I guess, in regards to like a regular household where essentially the wife usually stays home and the
Hmm.
man goes to work, kind of thing? Um, did anyone treat you differently, or was it a different concept for a lot of people to try to get their heads around?
Well, I will. Well, the first thing I will say, because I got it a lot, at least when I did it, started it 12 years ago. It's more acceptable now as more time has
Hmm.
gone on. But and even 12 years ago, it was still pretty acceptable. But I still ran into a lot of misconceptions, if you will. The first thing I would say to everybody is, no, it's not sitting at home doing nothing all day. Uh, uh, I can, even without the medical needs, I can tell you that I was busy literally every day. And now, was it all day long? It depended on the day, but I still had a lot going on literally every day. So I will say that. You know, the biggest hurdles I came into was when I ran into situations that on the other side, they typically dealt with mothers. For example, for my kids, I did all of the school stuff. I did all of the IEP meetings for my kids and their medical needs. And so, at least in the beginning, I ran into a lot of female teachers that did not know how to handle me, because they were so programmed to deal with the mother comes in. And if you go by the
Hmm.
typical roles, typically the mothers are a little more sensitive and understanding, and I was more hardline to, this is what I'd like, this is what I'd want. I get that there needs to be some playroom there, but no, I'm not bending too far either way. And so I ran into that. And you know most of the doctors, at least as me as a stay-at-home father, I got along with well. Although I can tell you about 4 or 5 that I fired directly to their face, because I felt like, I'm just like, you know what, you're not doing what I think you need to do. You are not the only doctor in this
Hmm.
profession. And so, especially the female doctors that I dealt with didn't really know how to handle that. And I just said, look, it's nothing personal, but you're not meeting our needs. Adios. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah, exactly.
that's mostly what I ran across. Everything else, most people, they didn't bat an eyelash to.
That's good to hear that, like, at least most people were at least somewhat accepting, and wasn't too bad for you. But I mean, I think you probably would have those moments no matter what.
Well, I mean,
Um,
I will say on the other side, I'm not a tiny person. I'm 6 foot 230, so it's I
yeah.
I can have an I mean I can have an opposing look, and I don't mean for it to be, but my general demeanor, people always think, well, you always just look like you're so angry. I'm not angry. This is just my face.
Uh, can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, your experience at being a stay-at-home dad and actually raising the children that have all these specialties and different disabilities going on?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I will say initially, when my son was born, we knew right off the bat. We
Hmm.
knew without a doubt that he had needs. When my daughter was born, literally almost 2 years to the day after he was born, she was initially what we called, for lack of better way to say it, the normal child. Because in the beginning, we didn't see any delays, we didn't see any issues. And it wasn't until about 6 months when she got tested on something where they go, well, we think you might need to see a neurologist for your daughter as well because we believe that she's got delays. And so, you know, that was obviously something neither of us wanted to hear.
Hmm.
I can admit now that we did not react well to that person that said that to us. I don't know if I can repeat what I said to her, but as for the parenting part of it, most days are like your typical stay-at-home parent. I get up at 6 in the morning. I get things going for them before they get up. I get them up about 6:15. I get them going. I get them up, dressed, changed, fed in their wheelchairs, all their medications, and then they're off to school when they were of that age. And then while they were at school, I got your typical cleaning the house, doing laundry, getting things prepped for when they get home, deciding what I'm gonna make for meals, and then depending on if I was giving them a bath that night or not, my evening kind of varied from just because since both of my kids did not necessarily walk on their own, I had to carry them. And
Hmm.
even my daughter now, who's 15 going on to 16, she's about 130 pounds. And so she can walk with assistance, but they're like to get her in the tub, I have to physically lift her into the tub. And I mean, I can still do it at this point, but she's gonna get bigger. And so I still had kind of your traditional stay-at-home mother, father role as it came to that. I just got added on the medications part of it, the like from school, they had occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech. And so when I would meet with them, they would all have kind of their goals. They would give me what I kind of needed to work with them on. So I would alternate the days of who I would help just because I couldn't do it all in one evening with my two kids.
Hmm.
And so now I will say when we got into cold and flu season with my son, it got if he got sick, that got vastly changed because when I knew he was getting sick, if I did not catch it fast enough, I knew I was going to rush him to the ER and I knew he was going to get admitted. And so I'm sure as a parent, there's a specific sound they make when they're sick that you've heard that sound before and it's go time.
Yep.
Yep,
And so
absolutely.
even with him, there was a specific sound he made when he coughed that it always perked my ears. I'm going, oh, no, I got to start my protocol. And I would go through the like 6 things I had to do every time I did it for him.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It is a lot to think about, but I mean, I guess it becomes your norm and you start
Your-
recognizing everything, right?
that's
Uh,
right, your norm
But
and your routine.
yeah.
yeah, I mean, after the initial shock of everything and after getting home from the hospital and those first few years when we were literally flying by the seat of our pants kind of thing, trying to figure out what was going on and how to do it. And, once we started getting the neurologists and the urologists and the pulmonologists and all to get them on the same page and what we need to do to be proactive to kind of help keep him out of the hospital. At that point, the time going in the hospital got a little more prolonged, but not by a lot.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so I think I remember you saying, well, you had sent us a message there when you reached out that
Mhm,
you had a little bit of like ADD,
mhm,
depression, anxiety kind of stuff.
mhm.
Can you kind of explain a little bit of that and how you deal with that with your children there?
Certainly. I basically got diagnosed with depression when I was 26, I believe, if I remember correctly, and I'm now 47. So I've dealt with it for over 2 decades. Uh, I later realized that depression and anxiety kind of go hand in hand. And I never really thought I had it until recent years, where just how I reacted to some things, it was kind of like a light bulb went off, and I went, well, I guess it really does go hand in hand. But um, as for the ADD, I actually didn't even though I probably had it all my life, I didn't get actually diagnosed until 2 years ago, and at
Mm-hmm.
45. And so even then, when I told the counselor, I went, I can't believe I'm 45 years old getting diagnosed with a condition that's generally diagnosed in children. And so
Yeah.
I said, but that answers a lot of questions over the last 20 years. So I will say the biggest issue with the ADD and the at least the anxiety part of it, um, I'm one of those people that when I get focused on something, I'm hyper focused on that one thing. So when it came to my son's care, if I knew he was sick and I knew I had to do my respiratory things and all that, I was literally like blinders on. My wife, if I were in the middle of doing something with my son, she could come in and walk literally beside me and I wouldn't even know she was there, because I was so hyper focused on, well, my son's got that cough. I can hear some congestion in his chest. I need to do X, Y, and Z to be able to get it out. And then when I finally stop and kind of unfocus, I go, "Hey, how long have you been there?" And she would go, "I've been sitting here for a minute." And I mean,
Yeah.
and even still today with my daughter, I'll go, give me a second. I'm gonna go in and do this. And when I walk into the kitchen, do something, I'll see 5 different other things that I need to do, and I'll get all those done before I get back to what I was supposed to. And I'll walk in there and go, "Well, Daddy forgot what he went in there for. You. Let me go back in there." And it's a ridiculous cycle. And so for kids with medical needs, it can be kind of a detriment if I don't keep it in
Yeah.
check. And
I,
but the depression, honestly, I got on meds with it reasonably quick afterwards, and that helped a lot. But I will say, as I don't know if it's a man's issue, but me as a man, for at least the first year or two, I had a very hard time accepting the fact that I was taking that once I started this medication, it was basically lifelong. It was I once I had to take it every day, and
mhm.
it was about that second or third year that my wife finally just looked at me. She said, "You know what? You may dislike taking it, but you are much better on it than you are off of it." And she said, "I can tell a vast difference." And it was at that point I finally kind of accepted, and I've been ever since.
Yeah, and for parents that are listening who may be facing similar challenges, what advice would you give them to overcome those obstacles and start finding joy in parenting despite the difficulties?
I will say, at least for me, and as a man, um, sometimes you just got to let go of ego. A lot of it, at least from my perspective as a man, is it comes down to ego. It's I'm supposed to be the foundation. I'm supposed to be the rock. I'm the one that's supposed to problem solve and get what needs to be done. And for a lot of men, going on a medication like that admits weakness. And we are taught from birth that it's not always a positive thing to admit weakness. And so if you can get around that, I'm a big proponent of therapy. Uh, you know, it, at least for those people that don't want to talk to people around them, at least when you're seeing a therapist, you're paying them. They're required to listen to you. And so at least someone there is listening, taking notes that has a background in it that can go, well, hey, have you ever thought of A, B, or C? Which is essentially what happened to me for years.
Oh, um, that's all really good information for everyone listening.
Absolutely.
Yeah, have someone to listen, even for therapy, I guess, to pay somebody.
Yeah.
Um, would you mind sharing a bit of your story about Zachary and maybe about what occurred and
Oh, sure. So my son, even with all of his medical issues, let's see, in 2000 and I think it was 14, he had a major like reconstruction surgery of his stomach and all that. And once he had that, a lot of the hospital stays we had prior to that, and there were a lot of them, kind of stopped. Uh, some of it was the surgery, some of it was at that point, I was so proactive to it. I was catching it early on enough to where I was beating it to the hospital. And so that was one of the reasons why the hospital stays went down. But so about 3 days before he passed, um, he came home like he normally did. And typically in the evening when my kids would come home, they'd come home and depending on if we had a bath or not, I would do that. And then I would fix dinner and I would feed both of them. And then we would put my daughter to bed about 7:30 because she's very routine oriented, and she did not, even though she's of the age to stay up later than that, she would give me just garbage if I kept her up past that. And so what we would do is we would put my daughter to bed, and then we would keep our son up for about another hour just to give him some one-on-one time with my wife and I, because I love my daughter, but she is a lot to handle. She is a strong personality, and we could just see it in my son's eyes at times. We're just like, put her to bed. And so uh, that's kind of what we would do. So about 3 days before, I made one of his favorite meals. He ate like a horse. And so that evening, we lounged in our bedroom with our son, and we watched some TV. And it got to be about time for his bedtime. And we brushed his teeth, and he threw up a little bit, and it didn't really strike me as anything. I thought, well, maybe you went too far with the electric toothbrush and kind of hit his gag reflex, and it just caught his attention. Or even if it was something he had in the years he was around, he had caught in several kind of 24-hour viruses, if you will. And I thought,
Mhm.
well, even if he is getting sick, it's probably just a 24-hour bug. We'll keep him home tomorrow. I'll kind of keep an eye on him, and we'll just go from there. So we put him to bed. He was up and down all night that night, which is unusual for him. So we get him up the next day. Now, during this whole time, I'm still a stay-at-home parent at this point. I'm not working at this point. So we get him up the next morning. You can tell he's uncomfortable. We had no signs to believe anything other than it was just a 24-hour bug. So I texted his teacher, said, I don't know what's going on with him. I'm going to keep him home. If he's feeling better tomorrow, I'll send him tomorrow. If not, because we're kind of butting up to a holiday at that point. And
Mhm.
I said, I'll keep him home, and then I'll have like 5 or 6 days, and then he should be fine by the time school gets back in session. And she's just like, okay, that's fine. So that whole day, he was sitting in the living room, and he absolutely refused to take a nap. And I could tell he was exhausted. And so I said, buddy, you can take a nap. I said, you see that couch over there? All day is going to be doing is sitting on it, watching TV or on my laptop, or you're not missing anything. So he refused to take a nap all day. And so I told my wife that evening, I said, I'm going to keep him out Friday. Yeah, for the next day was Friday because this was Thursday. I said, because something's not right. And I said, if he's got a virus, he's in a self-contained classroom. I don't want to spread it to a classroom full of kids with
Mhm.
medical issues. And so we put him in bed at the same time as his sister that night. And he got quiet instantly, and we thought, well, he's just exhausted. He hasn't slept well. Didn't hear him all night. Next morning, we got our daughter up, sent her off to school. We went into his bedroom, and he was awake and he was aware. And so I walked over to him, and I noticed on the right side of his cheek there was a dark green streak coming out of his mouth. And I look at it, and I go, and I remember telling my wife, I go, the only thing dark green in your body that would come out of your mouth is bile. And why is bile coming out of his mouth? And so we got him up, and he was kind of lethargic and floppy, like he couldn't hold himself up. And that really didn't strike me because I've had times in the past where that happened. It just meant he was getting sick, and I was probably going to have to take him to the hospital. So I get him out in the living room. I go through my mental priority list, and I give him a catheter to make sure that's not the issue. Nothing seems to be working. His midsection at that point is rock hard, like cinder block wall rock hard. And that struck me as odd because I'd never felt that before.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I look at my wife, and it was honestly a gut call. I went, I'm going to take him up to the hospital. Something's not right. I don't know what it is. And I said, something's telling me to take him to the hospital. So I get him in his chair, get him in the van, and from where I'm at in Atlanta to the hospital, it's approximately 60 miles. I'm sorry, I don't know metrics, so I don't know what it would be up there.
About 100 kilometers. But...
Okay. So I get on the interstate, and I'm flying. I'm doing probably 30 miles an hour over the speed limit that's posted. And so I get up there, and those people that live in Atlanta know that traffic in Atlanta is horrendous, especially at the time that I left. So I get up kind of on the north side of Atlanta, and I'm literally about a mile from the exit I've got to turn to go to the hospital. And on the board says something like major wreck, all lanes blocked. And I went, oh. This whole time going up there, he looks like he's fading in and out. And so I'm snapping my fingers at him, kind of like when someone gets a concussion, you don't want him to fall asleep because of the damage it could do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what's going on. And I keep snapping my fingers at him going, Zachary, stay with me. Stay with me. Come on, buddy. You got to stay awake. Stay awake. And so we hit this slowdown, and we're crawling for about 15 minutes. And I'm not letting my son see this, but in my head, I'm kind of freaking because I've never seen these signs before. I don't know what's going on. And so we finally get up to the front of it. And I don't know if the road worker let us go, but I saw daylight and I floored it. And no, I realized in the back of my mirror, I can see him kind of swearing at me and all that. Maybe I wasn't supposed to go, but he had no idea what was going on in my car.
Yeah.
So I get up to the hospital, get him out of the van, and he's very floppy at this point, and that really catches my attention. So I get him in his wheelchair. I go up to the ER, and I go into the ER, and there's a line, and I skip the line like to go to the front of the desk, and the security guard walks over to me as if to kind of yell at me, saying, you need to get in line. And before he can say anything, I look at him, and without skipping a beat, I went, I don't think he's breathing. I need help now. And so he looks at the nurse, kind of snaps his fingers. We've been in this hospital a lot, and this is the first time we rented a full run back into the ER. Like that nurse said, follow me, run. And so we get back into there. We get into one of the ER trauma rooms. I've been in this hospital so much, I kind of go into my hospital kind of thinking. I get him out of his wheelchair. I put him on the table in the trauma room, and I instinctively back out of the way as if to hope that I can stay in there while they're doing it versus me getting booted out. And so luckily there's another ER trauma room right next to it that's open and empty. And they say, you can stand in here, just stand over there. And I said, okay. They immediately cut his clothes off. They immediately start chest compressions. And the one thing that they did that like almost immediately, I don't know if it was a line to get into his system, but they immediately like drill something into his knee just instantly. And most normal people would probably be in excruciating pain, and he never flinched. And so I'm off into this other room watching from the doorway, and the head ER doc goes, what brought you him? Why did you bring him here? And back down as close to the minute as you can get. How long has he been this way? And so I told her that, and she goes, okay. She goes over and barks orders to all of the people that, because there's like 30 people that came in there from like nowhere. And so she barks orders to him, and then she walks back over to me and goes, explain to me why you brought him here. And so I told her everything, and then she goes, okay, and she barks orders to them and comes back. And while they're doing this, they've been doing chest compressions for, at this point, about 15 or 20 continuous minutes. They're just going back and forth, switching on and off. And at that point, they get the paddles out. Now, in the old school, like medical dramas, they get the plastic paddles where they put the gel on them, they rub them. They don't do that anymore. It's a pad over your heart and a pad on the side, and they back off and they press a button and it kind of does its thing. So they put they get ready to shock them. Everybody backs off. They hit the button, and literally like a TV show, he raises off the table almost. And I mean, I'm sitting here watching this, and I'm looking at the oxygen monitor with the heart rate and the pulse, because I always looked at that because we were always doing respiratory stuff in there, so I was very familiar with it. They shocked him that first time, and it literally went boop and went right back to what it was doing. And at that point, now granted, they still worked on him for 30 more minutes after that.
Wow.
But at that point, in my head, I went, he's not coming back. I just instinctively knew he wasn't coming back. And so they shocked him like 4 or 5 more times. And she came over to me and she said, well, we can shock him again. She said, but I don't think it's going to do anything. I said, well, this is out of my medical wheelhouse. Do what you think is professionally what's in the best interest. So they do it again. Nothing really happens. And at that point, she pronounces them. And so, as you can imagine, I went off to the side. I kind of had a moment for a second, and then I just, I called his mother, and you can imagine, I'll never forget the sound she made over the phone. And her parents brought her up. I called my mother because she watched him for several years when he was younger. And so after all that, I compartmentalized, and I kind of turned around, and then like the head of the care team came to me. I don't think she was expecting my response, because she came to me and said, offered her condolences. And I said, this is going to sound cold and harsh. I said, but this is the only way I can deal with this right now. I said, I'll deal with this in a minute. I said, but what I need to know from you is what happens from here. Does he go to the coroner? Do they do an autopsy? If they do an autopsy, what's the turnaround time? If they don't do an autopsy, what's the reason for doing one and for not doing one? Once all that's done, what do I need to tell the funeral home? How do they get a hold of him so they can bring him home? And I give her like 8 or 9 just rapid fire questions. She literally takes a step back, and I go, I'm sorry. I said, but I need to know information. It will make me feel better knowing what's going on so I can get my son home. And she goes, okay. She said, I'll talk to the coroner. And so she leaves. About 5 minutes later, she comes back. She said, well, the coroner's decided he's not going to do an autopsy. And I look at her and go, why? Why is he not going to do an autopsy? Kind of very stern at her. And I said, I want to know the protocol as to why you would or would not do it. And she said, well, you're in a children's hospital. And she goes, typically, the only reason why they would do an autopsy is drug related, criminally related. If he was perfectly healthy and all of a sudden he came in here and passed away, or if it was abuse related. And she said, other than that, she said, your son has an extensive history with medical issues. He said, they're just going to relate it something to one of his issues. And I said, I'm okay with that. And so, we kind of went from there, and the other care teams came in, and, my wife came up, and we spent about an hour in there. And I will say, the outside of his actual passing, the most difficult thing I think I've ever had to do was when we left there and we left him at the hospital. I had to take all of his cut off clothes, put him in his empty wheelchair, and wheel that empty wheelchair all the way through the hospital, put it in the van. And we literally drove home 60 miles stone silent the whole way. And so that was probably the most difficult thing I've ever had to do.
Yeah, I'm really incredibly sorry.
Well, thank you.
Um that's an incredible story. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery for you to be that vulnerable. Um yeah, it's rough.
Yeah.
I'm really feeling that.
It was definitely
Mm,
a very emotional story.
Well,
It's definitely a
and
lot.
I,
yeah.
I'm one of I'm weird in the sense I laugh in weird moments, and
Yeah.
I will. So my son had passed, and the next day we went to the funeral home that's in our area. And I'll give this place credit. You hear horror stories about funeral homes trying to push things on you and sell things to you. They were never that way. And so we got in there that first day, and it truly is. You experience your worst day of your life, and they give you this pamphlet, and you've got 1,000 decisions to make that can cost you anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000, depending on what you want. And so we go, well, what's the process? What do we do? And he said, and he was great. He was just like, there's two ways you can do it. He said, we've got package deals that you can do. And he said, they're all a little bit different. And he said, you can add or subtract from any one of the packages deal based on what you want. He said, or you can do it kind of a la carte. And so, and he was great. And I mean, everybody knows a funeral is expensive. And he said, you can do it a la carte. He said, but it will get pricey very quickly. And I said, I understand that. And I said, can we come back tomorrow and make our decision? He's sure. So we come back tomorrow. And so he asked us, are you going to bury? Are you going to cremate? And we originally thought we were going to bury, but then when he told us kind of the cost of what it was going to cost for them, and then the fact we were still going to have additional cost at where he was going to get buried, we were just like, wow, this is adding up very quickly. And so we decided to have our son cremated. And the one thing I had to laugh about was, so we decided we were going to have him cremated, and the guy goes, I'm required by a U.S. federal law to tell you. And I went, stop. I went, what does the U.S. government have anything to do with my son's cremation? And he goes, I'm required by U.S. federal law to tell you that once your loved one enters the area in which he's cremated, he can no longer come back in the original state in which he entered the cremation area. And I stopped for a second, and in front of everybody, excuse the language, but I went, who in the fuck thinks they can go back to their original state? I said, do they not realize it's fire? And he doesn't say anything, but he gives me this look of, you would be amazed at how many people think. And so the other thing was, this page he gave us, there was literally 8 places on both sides that my wife and I had to both initial, saying that we understood what cremation was
Oh.
and what the end process would be. And I went, only in America could you do that, where someone would think you could. So, we did that, and even he had to kind of chuckle, and I was just like, I cannot believe we've got to sign this. But so, we had him cremated and had a nice service and all that. And I mean, we've got his urn and a very nice kind of ornate clock in the house. We did that more or less just because we didn't want to bury him somewhere and then possibly move. And then he would
Mhm.
always be here and we'd have to always come back. And so that's kind of why we did that.
Fair.
Yeah. Only in America.
That's incredible. That's
Yeah.
just like, wow.
Right. Still trying to get my head around everything.
Yeah.
I can only applaud you for going through something like that and still going strong today. Like,
Well, if it were a month, 2 months, 6 months, maybe a year afterwards, I wouldn't be at this point. But let's see, I'm at about 2.25 years at this point, which is still early on in the process, so to speak.
yeah.
But it's much easier to talk about now than what it was. I mean, like anybody grieving, I still have my moments, I still have my days, but most days when people ask, just because I'm of the mindset, you know, what the world tells you what grief and death and dying is about is not always what it's necessarily about. And so my mindset is people need to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly is what they need to hear. You need to have a whole picture of what it really is like, because whether you like it or not, nobody gets out of this life alive. You're going to deal with it at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just my mindset when I talk about it.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned in your blog, Letters to Zachary,
Mhm.
it focuses on male grief.
Yes.
Why is it important to address the specific ways men grieve, and what advice can you offer other men who are experiencing loss?
Well, first of all, the reason why the page came out of me journaling. I originally started journaling because it was a private thing, and then I finally one day just decided I was going to start sharing it. And I wouldn't have even started the page, but literally the first entry that I put out there, I got a massive response from. And so when I did that several times and I kept getting the same response, I thought, well, maybe I have something here because I keep getting the same level of response. And so the page also came out of the fact of, as you probably know, in any group on Facebook or social media, it's typically 95, 96% women, and it's about 4 or 5% men. And of that 4 or 5% men, probably 0.5% of men are actually active in a lot of these groups, especially if it's
Mm-hmm.
anything emotion related. And so I got tired of going into groups, and nothing against dealing with wives and mothers and dealing with emotion. There's nothing wrong with that, but I wanted to run across people that were maybe not exactly the same, but similar in what I was dealing with, and I couldn't find it. And so I got really irritated with it. And years ago, I got this mindset: instead of complaining about it, I need to do something about it. And so I made the page. And so that's kind of where all this came about. But L- Letters to Zachary, for at least man, is I'm trying to show man by example that it's okay to be vulnerable in maybe not everywhere in society, but at least in defined kind of areas. And what I'm trying to show man is it's okay to grieve. If you're like me and you've lost a child, it's unfair to tell a man that he cannot grieve or grieve very shortly to the most devastating thing a parent can go through. Something that will the saying in the grief community is, we don't get over, we don't move away from it, we move forward from it. And so I try to get this space of, you can come in here and say whatever it is you feel, and I'm not going to allow people to ridicule you or tell you that your feelings aren't as important because you're a man versus a woman, or any one of those things. And the catchphrase in the last 10, 20 years has been safe space. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately that's what it is. It's me leading by example, saying it's okay to come in here, and it's okay if you're having a day where all you have are expletives that come out of your mouth because you're that angry about what's going on. Then come in here. I'm not going to censor you because of that, because I can tell you I've had many of those days. And I tell people, anybody that comes onto my page, I don't sugarcoat anything. I don't everything's raw, it's unfiltered. And especially in that first year of writing letters to my son, if you read them, if I felt like I needed to say 8 or 9 expletives explaining how I was feeling, that's how I wrote it, because I wrote in the moment. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and I honestly think that's why I got the draw I did, was because I just put it all out there. I wrote it in the moment. I wrote it when I was swearing, I was cussing, I was crying, I was, all of those things that were, as men, were told to hide. The other reason why I do this page is, um, I think it's a general thing in society for men. I don't know if it's any different, say, the US versus Canada. It's probably the same culturally speaking, but like men are taught from birth that, I'm of old enough generation where I was taught to, tape it up and walk it off, rub some dirt on it and move on. Uh,
Hmm.
you know, uh, or that, like when I played
Suck it up.
sport,
Yeah.
yep. Or when I played sports, are you hurt or are you injured? Is what they would always ask me, because there's a difference. If you're injured, you can leave. If you're hurt, you can get back out there. And so,
Hmm.
kind of that whole mindset. And then, this is some of the women I've come across has kind of rubbed them the wrong way. But I always say it. I said, men are taught from birth that the woman or the female's feelings come first. Period, without question. And I've had some women question me on that. I said, if you don't believe me, I said, in most houses in the States, I said, you will probably see the sign, and I quote, "Happy wife, happy life." I said it is in most houses. And I said 99% of men have no problem with that. I like my wife being happy. I have no problem with that. But what the underlying thing is women come first in everything. And so I'm not saying that I'm not trying to get men to overcome that. I'm just trying to level the playing field, so to speak, on that aspect, to say, yes, your feelings are important, but you you can't say in some of these situations that they're not more important, and that's what's being implied here. And so I have that, and then just the other things I tell people all the time. I said, at least down in the States here in the recent 10, 20 years, um, I don't want to make this about race, but what I've seen in the news based on what I'm going about, typically your punching bag right now is white middle class men in this country. We're all the world's problems at this point, because we're homophobic, we're misogynistic, we're all those catchphrases and all that kind of thing. And I say that to say, um um you know all these things, when men in general get battered with, it just puts us in our shell even more. And I'm trying to give them a space to get out of that shell. Um, oh Lord, I lost my train of thought.
That's all
Uh,
right.
Take your time.
So what I'm kind of understanding is that you're trying to find these men that are maybe don't know how to express themselves or grieve or get through their own process because they're not really thinking about making themselves better, I guess would be the best way to put it. They putting everyone else first, like their wife or
mhm,
someone else, and they're also the brunt of society
mhm.
kind of thing, and they're just expected to suck it up and handle it.
Yeah, men are generally expected. They'll get a short period of time, if they get that at all, to grieve however they're going to grieve, and it's back to work. It's back to being it's back to being the foundation of either home or work life, or it's back to doing all the things that we were doing before. And I tell other men, and even groups I've been in where there's been a lot of women in there, I said, you wonder why men have the highest rates of heart attacks, the highest rate of coronary heart disease. Right now, the number one killer of men 18 to 45 is suicide.
Hmm.
It's more than heart attacks and a couple other things, I think, combined in the States. And I tell people, I at least tell the women in the groups I've been a part of, I said, you've got to find a way for them. I said, if they're like me and they hold it in, is the reason why I started journaling. It's going to eat them alive, and it's going to come out somewhere. I said, whether it's at work or towards you, or Lord forbid, towards you or the kids, it's going to come. And so, you know, that that's kind of the culmination of this group. The last thing this group is to, now I'm no expert on it, but to at least teach women kind of the male thinking of what I think they should do to help their significant male others. You know, like for example, in one of the groups I was in, I made the comment, if your husband say comes to you and thinks it's important enough to open up to you to tell you something, listen, not listen to respond. I said, because the stereotype is we don't come to you. And I said, so if we feel like there's something important to come to you, it's important to us. I said, so if you listen and your first response is something to the effect of, well, you're really upset about that, or I can't believe you're upset about that. I said, men are going to give you 2 or 3 chances. And I said, if you go through all those chances, I said, a lot of men are going to get quiet. And I said, you're not going to hear from them again. I said, you have to be willing to open up to that.
Mhm.
And so those are essentially the 3 things of the pages. Just me by example, trying to help other women and at least trying to educate women the best I can from a male's point of view of, here's kind of the thinking, here's what you need to look out for. This is what I think is going to work. If you don't want to go by this, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, that's really good. Um, so what are some resources you would recommend for anyone dealing with grief, loss of a child, um,
Um,
anything of that nature?
well, I would say, well, I'm a big social media user. Anytime any of the like medical needs and all, I get on social media and see if I can find a group, or I can get on the internet and see if I can find people that deal with it, no matter how rare or common it is. Um, I will tell you, at least on Facebook, and even there are huge grief communities on Facebook and specifically TikTok. There's a huge grief community on there. I can tell you right now, there's probably at least 8 grief groups I'm a part of on Facebook alone right now, and there's probably 100 more. I would say social media is a very great resource. A lot of those grief groups are private, closed off groups, and the standard is what's said here is kept here. It's that kind of thing.
Hmm.
I'm also a big proponent of therapy. If you can get in to see someone, uh, the irony of my therapy was I was just about to stop seeing my therapist right before my son passed away, because I thought I'd kind of gone through the season I was seeing her for. And then when that happened, I was seeing her at about a year at that point, and I saw her for another year after that because of just everything. So I would say social media therapy, online. There's a ton of podcasts that deal with grief that you can listen to. Let's see, there's grief Zoom sessions. There's one currently going on called The Price of Love, done by Paula Hill Bloom. There's another one that's going on called Grief to Hope, done by Paige Rieger. Those are the 2 big ones that I know of, but there's a ton on social media.
Perfect. That's excellent.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good to know. Um, is there anything else that you wish you knew before your son passed, or anything you'd like to let parents know about who are facing any sort of similar situations? Um,
Um, I don't know if there was anything I could know before my son passed. As a parent of a child with chronic illnesses, even though I didn't think it was going to happen, it was always something in the back of my brain that was a possibility with what he dealt with. For me, it was the biggest shock was just how unexpected and fast it was. Because from the moment that we
mhm.
thought things were happening to the moment he actually passed was approximately 36 hours. It was quick. I mean, the only way it could have been faster is if it had been like an automobile accident or something like that. But uh, you know, the only thing I can tell people about grief is grief sucks. I mean, that's the simplest, nicest way I can say it. In the beginning, it's going to be terrible. You're not going to want to do anything. You're not going to want to go anywhere. You're not going to want to deal with the world. If the only thing you can do that day is breathe and get up out of bed, then do that. At some
Mhm.
point, you'll start venturing a little. It's all small steps. You'll start venturing a little for you. After enough time, you'll get more and more. We all have. I will say the old adage that time heals all wounds is garbage. In fact, my response has been the person that came up with that quote probably never lost a child. Um, but for grief, I will say there's a vast community out there to help you that have either just happened to somewhere in the middle or longtime veterans that will. Even with me doing this page, I've run across so many people that have just openly helped me of here's some pointers, here's what you need to do, here's kind of what you don't need to do, that kind of stuff. As for special needs, again, there's a ton of communities out there depending on what you're dealing with. Um, if you can't see people face to face, again, social media is wonderful. I mean, you can do things like what we're doing here today. You can run across,
Yep.
get into a group, message someone, and boom, 2 or 3 days later, you're talking to them, or even if you're just messaging online. So if you can't get out to talk to someone, this is honestly the next best thing.
Oh, so we got our couple of questions here.
Yeah, we have a couple, sorry, a couple fun questions.
Sure.
If you were to win the lottery, what would you do?
Well, I would do the standard of paying off all my debt that I have, so I wouldn't have to worry about that. But I mean, after that, there's several charitable organizations that we have worked with over the years that, like for example, a year or two ago, I think in the States it got to be like $2 billion or something ridiculous. And I looked at my wife and I said, if we were to win $2 billion, even after taxes, I said it would still be like $1 billion anyways. I said we would, one of the special needs organizations that helped us all the way through my son's passing. I said, and we know the board very well. We would give the head of the board a call and just say, "Are you sitting down because you're about to get probably an 8-digit donation?" And
Wow.
that kind of thing, just because they have been phenomenal. In fact, the organization we deal with deals with chronic and terminal illness children. And when I emailed her to tell her my son had passed away, 2 days later she called me and she said, "Whatever you're spending on your funeral, send it to us. It is paid for.
Wow,
They
that's
paid for it
incredible.
all." And
What's
it
the
was
what's the
not a
name of the
huge.
organization?
What's that?
What was the organization?
It's an organization here in Atlanta by the name of Bert's Big Adventure.
Okay.
It's through the radio station. Well, it's through Q100 and the show called The Burt Show. It was the guy that's the namesake. He and his now ex-wife, they came up with this organization, and basically what happens is 12 families a year get nominated for an all expenses paid trip down to Disney. Literally everything is taken care of to give the parents a break, the families a chance to make memories that they wouldn't have had a chance to make before, and not have any concern. Like they bring medical staff down there, they bring medical stuff down there, they allow you to bring all your medical equipment should you need it to come down there. They've got doctors on call while you're down there, so literally everything is taken care of. All expenses are paid for, everything. I mean, this is for 5 continuous days down at Disney, and it goes through all three parks. It it literally starts at 7 in the morning, goes to about 8 at night, literally every day. I don't think we've ever gone that hard for that many days in a row.
Wow.
And then even after that, when you get back, once a quarter throughout the entire year, they have reunions 4 times a year, and you can go every year until you decide you want to stop.
Wow.
that are,
Wow.
and
Yep.
so that they are a phenomenal organization.
That sounds like they are definitely due for some donations. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Mhm.
And then I guess what's the next question we have for you? Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
Oh, I always love that on
Yeah.
interviews.
That's why we ask it. Everyone loves it.
Um, honestly, at this point, I hate to use the young person's term, but I'm kind of growing my brand, if you will. Um, I'd like to get this bigger in the sense of helping others.
Yep.
Even though I'm dealing with grief and all that, I've enjoyed the response I've gotten. I've already, at least with some of what I would call the heavyweights in the grief community, I've gotten a lot of really good response from them. I've only been doing it 7 months, and I'm creeping up towards about 1,000 followers. I mean, and that may not be big to someone else, but to me, seeing as I started from nothing 7 months ago, and I'm at 925, I think, as of the other day, that to me, that's just massive. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm currently doing several YouTube collaborations and that kind of thing. I'd like to get into probably public speaking, but that's one of those things you got to kind of know people to get your foot in the door, and I haven't quite figured that out yet. I know people based on my writing have said, "Have you ever considered writing a book?" And I've thought about it. At least initially, I didn't think I had enough material. Now I've got like a 2-inch binder full of stuff, so I'm considering probably publishing that. Um, there's several kind of irons in the fire. There's no the end goal is just in the grief community. What that complete end is, I honestly don't know. I'd like to get a little more public figure just to kind of get out there. Maybe one day I'll get popular enough to kind of do a TED talk, that kind of thing. But that's kind of where I'm heading in the next 5 years.
Wow.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
keep going at it. There's a lot to tell from your side there, and a lot people can get out of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's gonna do it mostly for us today.
Okay.
So before we get going, where can everyone find out a lot more about you?
Okay, the page I'm mainly on right now is on Facebook. That's Letters to Zachary. That's the two is TO, Letters to Zachary. Now on all my other accounts is Letters to the number 2 Zachary, and so that's Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. It's all letters with the number 2 Zachary. Probably my next biggest one's TikTok, and I can't believe I'm doing that at my age. But just because I've heard there's a huge community on there for that, and I do a lot of videos on there. In fact, I have more recently. But yeah, my main one's on Facebook, and probably my next is TikTok. But the other ones are kind of just reposts of what I've already done, just to kind of meet those other areas. So those are kind of my main areas.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. So I think that's gonna do it for us today. But
Awesome.
this is our wonderful guest, Jason Tuttle. I'm Jeff,
And I'm Jenna.
and it's the Real Life Parenting Podcast.